Welcome everyone. Bienvenidos a todos.
Hola, buenas tardes.
Tardes.
Buenas tardes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Vamos a darle unos
Buenas-
minutitos nada más a las personas para que se unan a la junta y comenzamos en unos momentos. We're just going to give folks a few minutes to join the meeting and then we'll start momentarily.
Welcome everyone. Get started in a few minutes.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon.
Buenas tardes a todos el panel y a todo el grupo.
Good afternoon.
Buenas tardes.
All right, Monique, let me know whenever you think we've reached critical mass. Are we good?
I think we are good. We're about 20 plus people in, so go ahead and take
Alright.
it easy.
All right, welcome everybody to tonight's meeting. Bienvenidos a todos a la reunión de esta tarde. We have a busy evening as we're gonna review some very important documents with all of you. Nos espera una tarde bastante ocupada porque vamos a estar revisando unos documentos importantes con todos ustedes. I'm going to provide instructions to access interpretation services, both in English and in Spanish. Voy a proveer instrucciones para acceder al servicio de interpretación. Lo voy a hacer primero en inglés y después en español. So to access interpretation services, if you're joining us from your tablet, please locate the menu icon, which is the three dots on the top of your screen. And then from there, you can click on language interpretation. And then after that, you can select the language of your preference, English or Spanish. If you're joining us from your computer, you can locate the interpretation icon in the form of a globe at the bottom of your screen. And then from there, you can just select English or Spanish. If you're joining us from your telephone, from your smartphone, it's similar to a tablet. You can locate the icon with the three dots. And then from there, you can select language interpretation and select English or Spanish. Muy bien, ahora voy a dar las instrucciones en español para acceder a los servicios de interpretación. Si nos acompaña desde su tableta o iPad, pueden localizar el menú de los 3 puntos que se encuentran en la parte superior de su iPad y de ahí pueden seleccionar Language Interpretation o interpretación del lenguaje y enseguida seleccionar el lenguaje de su preferencia, inglés o español, en este caso sería español. Si se unen a la junta a través de su computadora, pueden localizar el menú con forma de globo de interpretación en la parte inferior y después pueden seleccionar inglés o español. Y si se están uniendo a través de su teléfono inteligente o smartphone, igualmente pueden localizar el menú con los 3 puntos. De ahí hacen clic y pueden seleccionar Language Interpretation o interpretación del lenguaje y seleccionar el idioma de su preferencia, inglés o español. El icono de interpretación debe estar activado ahora, así que pueden seleccionar su lenguaje en este momento. Gracias. I will turn it over to Monique. Le voy a pasar la palabra a Monique.
Thank you everyone for spending your evening with us today. As Domingo mentioned, we do, as always, have a full agenda, but what's exciting is that we're certainly making progress on integrating your feedback into the draft Community Mission Reduction Program document. And so we're going to go over 3 chapters today. I really want to be mindful that there may not be a lot of back and forth today, and that's okay. But I really want to set you all up for success in navigating the 3 chapters, which I'll share with you in the chat box when we get to that section, and provide some foundational high-level information on how to navigate or what to expect in those 3 chapters that we'll be going over today. But before we get that started, I'm gonna actually pull up my agenda here. Can you all see the screen okay? Can you see the agenda screen? All right, I got the thumbs up from Domingo.
Sí.
Okay, perfecto. Gracias, Manuela. Thank you, Manuela.
Sí,
So as you can see,
sí, sí.
the bulk of our conversation, again, is going to be those 3 chapters. But before that, we'll have a presentation by the Air Pollution Control District's incentives team. They pre-recorded a presentation. I had emailed that out I believe on Monday, I emailed that out. I typically like to get those presentations to you all at least a week before, but because I wasn't able to, what we'll do, and we have some time today, what we'll do is I'll actually show that video presentation as part of this meeting, and you'll all have an opportunity to ask questions. We have folks from that team that are available to answer any questions, also hear your reflections and thoughts in terms of what's being proposed as part of that presentation as well. And then, yeah, we'll move on to public comments and then closing remarks. But before we get started, I want to first make sure we do our roll call. So if you're here, go ahead and say here or presente or whatever you like to say, but say it out loud so I'm able to hear, because I can't see everybody here. So I'm going to go ahead and call folks' names, and when you hear your name, say here or presente or whatever you'd like. So first we have Manuela.
Presente.
Olga. Wendy.
Presente.
Okay, welcome, Wendy. Rudy.
Gracias.
Okay. Juan Miguel. Jason. I think I saw Jason come in. I might be mistaken. Jason, are you here? Okay. Mariano.
Sorry, Jason here. I mixed up my screen. I couldn't get back to unmute.
No worries, no worries. Welcome, Jason. Good to see you. Mariano.
Mariano
Put in the chat that he's here.
Put in the chat.
Okay, perfect. Thank you
His mic
for
is not
that
working.
support. Not able to see everything on my screen at the moment. Alejandro, I think I just heard you right
Here.
now.
Yeah.
All right. Stanford. Stan. Actually see you, Stan. Thank you. Jenny.
Here.
Welcome, Jenny. Diane.
I'm here.
And Diane. Shelby. Irma.
Here.
Okay, Irma, welcome. Christopher. Okay. Yanet. Maria. Marie. Mauricio. Okay. Guadalupe. Marisela. David.
Presente.
Oh, Marisela. Okay. All right.
Present.
David. Trinidad.
Presente.
Okay. Lee.
Here.
Elsa. Elsa. Okay. Maritza.
Here.
Right. Zach. And Mariela.
Mariela here.
Right. Great. Okay. So before we get into agenda item number 2, the presentation, the pre-recorded presentation, I did want to share with folks an update that I heard from APCD's compliance division. They shared with me earlier this week or last week, I should say, that not this past weekend, but the weekend before, they received about 20 complaints from folks in San Isidro, specifically around the odor from the Tijuana River, or from like sewage they were smelling, and folks were reporting that they thought it might be a couple of pumps on the US side of things. And I did want to share that our compliance division did send out some folks out to go check on those, the pump stations, to see where exactly the odor was coming from. And they determined that there wasn't evidence to support that it was coming from, those wastewater pump stations on the US side, that they weren't operating properly. But that it was actually the odor was coming more from the Tijuana River Valley, from kind of like an unknown, like kind of pinpointed area in the Tijuana River Valley. So what the compliance team did do is they reported all those complaints to the Environmental Protection Agency that has that's keeping a record of these things, and that actually has jurisdiction to at least on the US side, to do investigations. But also it's really important that these complaints continue to be logged, particularly because I know folks, in San Isidro, Pearl Beach, Chula Vista, all the way to Coronado, have been advocating for this issue to be declared a federal emergency, so that there's funding that comes in to address this issue much more quickly than how it's progressing at this moment. So all of that is to say that I wanted to give everybody an update in terms of, how many complaints we received, which was quite a bit. We did, APCD did send inspectors out there, and then forwarded the complaints to the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. I plan on following up with the folks at the EPA to kind of see where they're at in kind of their investigation as well, and also see what potential next steps that they may be taking, if any, if they're able to, if any. I do have this up on the screen, which is how you can report any air quality issue, which also includes odors as well, to the Air Pollution Control District. We have a hotline, so a phone number you can call, email address, but also we have an app as well that you can use as well if there's any air quality concerns that you have. I encourage you all to continue to call when the odors are really bad, even though it may not be within the air district's jurisdiction to to address that issue. But I think it's critically important that these things get on the public record to further support the advocacy efforts that folks, that community members and the county and that the various cities are doing to elevate this issue, you know, at the national level. So again, here's the information. I encourage you all to continue to call and report. And we'll do our due diligence at the Air Pollution Control District to investigate, but also to make sure that those complaints get into the right hands and get noted in the record as well. So I wanted to share that update with you all and let you know that APCD staff did respond. I'm trying to see if I have information in terms of the response time. I don't here, but typically on average, APCD will send compliance staff to check on an issue within like 6 to 7 hours of a complaint being issued on average. And so I don't have the specifics for this one, but it is something that the compliance staff did go and check out and made sure that it was sent to the right folks at the EPA, that was forwarded along. Again, I'm going to try to connect with them to see if they have any other information for us. They may not be able to do anything about it, right? But it's important that we continue to make note of this to support the advocacy efforts. I want to pause there and see if folks have any questions or comments that they'd like to share on this issue. Irma. Irma, sí.
Sí, yo tengo una pregunta. Entonces, ¿usted sugeriría? Ok.
Un momento.
Entonces, okay.
What's the question, Irma? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
¿Ya? Ok. Entonces nos sugiere que sigamos hablando porque la verdad están bien fuertes los olores. Después de las 5 de la tarde se sueltan los olores, pero súper pesados. Súper pesados. No los aguanta uno. Tiene uno que estar cerrando todo, ventanas y todo, porque está muy fuerte. Yo estaba pensando, ¿dónde hablo? ¿Dónde? ¿Cómo? ¿Por qué no viene la gente y huele después de las 5 o 6 de la tarde que estuvieran aquí? Porque se suelten, yo creo que en todo San Isidro, porque se suelta muy fuerte ese olor, fuerte, muy pesado. Entonces nos sugiere que sigamos hablando para que nos hagan conciencia de los olores que estamos absorbiendo nosotros.
Yeah, so what I'm suggesting is continue to put that on the record, and so we can be supportive of the advocacy efforts. I'm also, what I want to do as well, and I can follow up via email, but I want to check in with their compliance team, is find who directly at EPA those complaints can be filed to as well. So it kind of also cuts out the middle person, so to speak, APCD, from kind of forwarding those along. But I need to find out, because I think there's a way to do it also online as well, who specifically at the EPA those complaints should be going to, because ultimately when APCD gets in, which that's part of our role too, right? To issue those complaints and forward it to where they need to go. If we know it's an odor issue with the Tijuana River, ideally we'd want to go directly to EPA. And so I want to get that information to you all as well. And I could send that via email tomorrow or early next week sometime. But yeah, in the interim, please continue to use that hotline. Domingo, were you going to add something to that?
Yes.
Ok, está bien. Gracias.
Le voy a decir en español directamente para Irma, ya que ella hizo la pregunta. Una de las cosas que también aprendí es que hubieron impactos a la planta que trata aguas negras en la frontera. Hubieron impactos debido al huracán más reciente que hubo. Entonces eso probablemente empeoró la situación hasta
Mil
cierto
disculpas,
punto.
no se oye nada con este domingo vigil. Está como
Sí,
mudo.
yo
Gracias.
también iba a decir que no se oye nada.
A ver, perdón, ¿me escuchan ya?
Ya, ahora sí, ya. Ya,
Muy
Sí,
bien.
ya.
gracias.
Perdón, es que no estaba en
Yo
el
sí
canal
escucho.
correcto. Ok.
Yo sí estoy escuchando también.
Gracias. Comentaba que parte de lo que ha empeorado un poco el problema recientemente es que hubieron impactos en la planta que trata aguas negras en la frontera debido al huracán reciente. Entonces, eso también ha hecho que empeore un poco la situación, pero como dice Monique, nosotros a pesar de que no tenemos jurisdicción sobre la trata de aguas negras o sobre el río, podemos enviar, documentar este tipo de quejas y conectarlos con las agencias adecuadas eh, para que se siga tomando acción. Recientemente también salió un artículo en el que se destaca que el gobernador de California tiene la autoridad para declarar estado de emergencia o no esta situación en la frontera. Y el hecho de que nosotros estemos documentando todo este tipo de quejas apoya más la causa de que él pueda, de que él tome acción para declarar estado de emergencia y que haya una intervención más directa por parte del gobierno federal. Entonces, aparte de hacer la conexión con la EPA, también vamos a investigar a nivel estatal cuál sería la agencia adecuada para que reciba este tipo de quejas, pero definitivamente los animamos a que continúen eh, presentando estas quejas para que se puedan documentar. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Domingo. Alejandro.
Yeah, I think some organizations from San Diego back in, I want to say mid-August maybe, we're trying to get the governor to sign to declare an emergency, and from what I understand, he said that yes, it's bad, but it will not be declared a state of emergency. So yeah, maybe keep on documenting this complaints, because I actually wasn't even aware that we could file complaints through APCD about the odor in the Tijuana River estuary. So yeah, I think that's a good idea. And also, from what I understand, is that there was failure to do maintenance on the treatment plant, and with the hurricane, it just ended up breaking something that just wasn't being upkept with. So if you also could find out who's responsible for that plant itself, that'd be good, because I actually have no idea. So we can also voice our concerns to them.
Yeah, more directly to the operators. Yeah.
And
Right, right.
Alejandro, I'm gonna put an article on the chat with some of the information that both you and I just mentioned. Unfortunately, it's only available in English, but the information it has really good information.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alejandro. Any other questions or comments on that particular
No.
issue?
Sí, buenas tardes. Yo quería comentar acerca de que hace unos semanas, yo estoy acá por el área de South Bay, y yo, igual como Irma, como dicen San Isidro, igual se sienten de intenso el olor acá. Y hace unas semanas nos avisaron que el agua estaba contaminada y que no podíamos usar ni siquiera la que usamos aquí en la casa filtrada para tomar. Esto duró como 3 días porque avisaron pues que tenían que arreglar el problema. Todavía faltaban el tiempo que decían que ya podíamos empezar a usar el agua normalmente. Todavía nos dejaron otro día más que todavía no estaba listo. Así que pasamos por muy un tiempo muy difícil no sé si se deba a lo que están comentando acerca de la contaminación del huracán, no sé. ¿Qué pueden decir al respecto? Gracias.
Yeah, I remember, thank you so much for sharing that, Trinidad. I remember a couple weeks ago, there was like a boil water advisory because of the bacteria levels in the water. And that was also associated with the hurricane as well, in terms of those wastewater treatments, systems breaking down and then contaminating, drinking water as well. I don't have any more details on that. I know that the advisory has been lifted, meaning the water is now deemed okay to now drink and bathe with and use for cooking and so forth. But Domingo, do you have any more information on that, or have you heard anything else on that?
I don't at the moment. Like I said, I shared an article that has some really good information related to what we're talking about, and it is the International Boundary and Water Commission, or also known as the IBWC. That's the federal agency that manages the International Treatment Plant. But my understanding was that the rains overwhelmed the system, and so there was an overflow for the sewage. It had no other place to go than out in the river, so that exacerbated the problem.
Thanks for sharing that, Domingo. Yeah, so again, encourage you all to continue to document that by calling APCD. We're also going to get, like I shared with you, I'm going to try to find the direct information to who at EPA those direct complaints can go to as well. But one of the things that we could use as part of our advocacy is that documentation. Which sounds really silly. We really shouldn't have to do that. But anything we can do to kind of help support and make the case, we're happy to support the community in doing so as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead. We're at 5:30. I want to go ahead and transition us to the next item on the agenda, which is a presentation. It's a pre-recorded presentation, but I'll go ahead and play it for us all here in the room. It was developed by Kathy and Heidi on the incentives teams. There's Kathy on the screen. I think Heidi's here as well this evening. And so I'll go ahead and play the video first, and then Kathy and Heidi from the incentives team, they're here to answer any questions, but also to hear your feedback as well from what they're proposing in terms of distributing incentives this season. And so there's a lot of exciting updates. Just for a heads up, the video is in English audioly, but we do have Spanish subtitles. The interpreters will be reading the subtitles or making some corrections on the fly as well on the Spanish channel simultaneously. So there are ways for folks to kind of engage with the video, either through reading the subtitles in Spanish or hearing the reading of the subtitles with maybe some corrections here and there simultaneously as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Make sure. Let's see here. And this video is about 5 to 6 minutes. So we'll watch the video first, and then we'll have Kathy and Heidi share a bit more and hear you all if you have any questions or anything feedback you'd like to share as well.
Hello, steering committee members. At our September meetings, we would like to discuss the latest updates to our incentive programs and get your feedback. San Diego APCD provides incentive funding for clean air projects through the Community Air Protection Program, or AB 617 incentives. The program focuses on replacing diesel equipment with other cleaner machines to reduce pollution from these old engines. Part of the process is to get feedback from the steering committees on what our program priorities should be. In our discussions, we have heard loud and clear that the steering committees want us to prioritize zero-emission equipment like electric trucks. Because of this, we've set up the program to approve all zero-emission projects first, then fund whatever else we can with the rest of the money. As a reminder, AB 617 incentives are used to encourage projects that benefit disadvantaged communities as defined by the state's CalEnviroscreen 4.0. This map shows those communities in San Diego. This year, this also includes tribal areas. At least 70% of the AB 617 incentive funding must be spent in projects that benefit people in these areas. AB 617 incentives are also intended to help people in low-income communities. This map shows those communities in blue. At least 80% of AB 617 incentive funding must be spent on projects that benefit people in these disadvantaged and low-income areas. AB 617 incentives pay for two types of projects. The regular diesel engine replacement projects we traditionally do, replacing diesel engines or machines with cleaner ones, and two specific projects identified in the community emission reduction plans like the Portside Zero Emission Truck Pilot Project. Over the past 6 years, the district has been awarded about $71 million for these projects. Of that, we've contracted or paid out almost $40 million so far. Currently, we have about $31 million to spend on new projects. The $40 million that has already been contracted has gone to replace or repower 88 pieces of equipment like boats, trucks, and agricultural equipment. Of these 88, 23 are electric, and there are 4 charging stations in the process of being installed. For the $31 million still available to spend, we asked companies in January and February to submit applications as part of our regular solicitation. We received 238 applications requesting $83 million in funding over all of our incentive programs. The application is still open and people can currently apply to be on our backup list of projects. As we evaluate the projects, we find which ones meet all the criteria and how much they qualify for. This slide shows a timeline of where we are now in the process. Right now, we're ready to approve projects and put applicants under contract to replace their equipment. Here's a breakdown of the projects that meet the requirements of the AB 617 incentive program. All of these projects benefit people in disadvantaged communities and are eligible for a total of $10 million in funding. There are zero-emission trucks, diesel marine vessels, and agricultural equipment, natural gas buses, and cross-border trucks in this year's group of projects. Here is a graphic showing approximately where those projects are located. They're all in disadvantaged communities in Portside, Chula Vista, San Isidro, and Otay Mesa. We want to make sure we can fund projects that meet the priorities of the steering committee as much as possible. We do not have much control over what projects people apply for, but we can set priorities, and if there are more projects than funding, we can prioritize what sort of projects would be first to be funded. Does the project list this year meet the priorities of the community? We would like to hear your feedback to continue to make the program meet the community's needs now and in the future, and we're looking forward to the discussion at the steering committee meetings. Along with projects in disadvantaged communities, we had very strong demand this year for zero-emission school buses, many of which serve low-income but not disadvantaged communities, the blue sections on that map at the beginning of the presentation. This slide shows approximately where those school buses would operate. They serve low-income communities in the northern part of the county. We would like to discuss with the steering committees if they would support using up to $10 million in AB 617 incentives to provide funding for electric school buses in these communities. Once we know the priorities of the group, our next steps for the incentives will be to do the final verification and finalize grant amounts, then enter into contracts. After that, the team will begin outreach for the next round of applications using the community priorities as our guide. We'll also be working with CARB to create more community-identified projects that are in the emission reduction plans. We look forward to our conversations with the steering committees. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kathy and Heidi to facilitate this part of the discussion.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. As you saw in the presentation, we really have two questions. We want to get your feedback on the project mix that you saw for this year's applications, and to know if you would support using some additional funding from the project to fund those zero emission school buses for low-income students in the northern part of the county. So happy to start with the project mix. Does anyone have any feedback or information they'd like to share about the projects that were applied for this year? Okay. I'm not hearing anyone, but we're happy to circle back around to that. It would be helpful to us to hear if you support those, because then we can move forward with a strong positive affirmation on these projects that will reduce air pollution in the communities.
Kathy, I have a quick question.
Sure.
Were there any projects selected or that were applied for within San Ysidro and Otay Mesa? And if so, what kind of projects were those?
It's a good question, Monique. The projects that we would fund in San Ysidro and Otay Mesa are two types of projects. One is there were several cross-border trucks that would be converting from natural gas or from diesel trucks to natural gas. Yeah, I can see if I can pull up my screen and share that with you all. Hang on just a second. And so there would be cross-border trucks that would be natural gas instead of diesel, low emission natural gas trucks. And then there's some agricultural equipment close to San Ysidro for some of the farming that happens along there in the southern part of the area, if that makes sense. Let me see if I can share my screen here.
Awesome. And Kathy, as you're pulling that up, I see Jenny with your hand up. If Jenny, and then we can go to Jason next.
Hi, Jenny Quintana. I had a similar question to Monique, but I also have a question I'm kind of embarrassed to ask because I missed the last meeting, and probably everyone else knows the answer to this, so I'm sorry. But could you remind me the relationship between the border community AB 617 activities and the overall AB 617 funding to the County of San Diego? I'm just a little confused. So thank you.
You're not the only one who gets confused on this, Jenny. It's pretty complicated. There's two separate sets of funding for AB 617 activities that the Air District carries out. One is for our monitoring and support activities on that side. And then there's a larger chunk that is specifically set aside for incentive programs to do those equipment change out kind of work. Does that make sense?
Yes, but then what relation do they have to the designated communities in San Diego County, I guess? And again, this was probably covered at a previous meeting. I apologize.
No, it's okay. It's okay. So the incentive funding, the state gives us to the tune of about $15 to $20 million a year for incentive programs in these projects. The state requires that the district allocate at least 70% of that funding that we receive countywide to projects that benefit the CalEnviroScreen disadvantaged communities, of which Portside and International Border are contained in that they're a subset of those disadvantaged communities that are designated by the state. So 70% of the funding needs to be spent on projects that benefit people in those disadvantaged communities. There's another 10% that must at least benefit folks in low-income communities. And then the last 20% is not required to be spent in those communities, but our goal is to spend as much as we can on projects that benefit those disadvantaged communities.
Let's go to Jason and then Alejandro.
Yes, thank you. One question: what is the timeline for the actual getting this money out the door to the applicants?
It's a reimbursement program. So what would happen next is right now we're in the process of evaluating and approving projects, and people sign a contract. If you're selected, if your project is selected, you sign a contract with the Air District that says start. You can go buy equipment now. Or typically what people do is they have to order the equipment. We wait for that equipment to come in. They destroy their old equipment, get that new equipment in service. They pay for that, and then they submit a reimbursement to the Air District to get reimbursed for what their grant amount is. That can take anywhere from 6 months from when they sign the contract, or maybe even sooner, to we typically have 2 or 3 years to spend the money.
Okay, and then second, I just 3 quick questions. The second is,
Sure.
Is there, because these are, well, yeah, these are U.S. funds, are there facilities in Mexico that are able to utilize this funding? Meaning, they're cross-border trucks, so obviously some of these trucks are originating in Mexico.
The program right now requires that whatever company or business that we contract with have a U.S. presence. They need to be a company in the United States. Many of the companies that we work with for the cross-border truck typically have a presence both in Mexico and the United States.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. So if I've got the importadora in San Diego, but I'm actually doing a truck change out or whatever in Mexico, we could still qualify that under the San Diego branch.
Yeah, you have to show us.
Okay, no way.
Yeah, you have to show us documentation that those trucks are running in the U.S.
Okay, perfect. And then just lastly, to close it out, I obviously would greatly support the cross-border truck issue or projects. This has become a real issue, I know, for my counterparts in OTAI, because with the state laws, there's been some question as to when restrictions for trucks that aren't electric being able to actually enter the United States. And I mean, we've heard dates as soon as January 24 on some of these things. So just what you asked, which products we really support. So I would happily support those the cross-border trucking projects.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Let's go to Alejandro and then Lee.
Yeah, I had a somewhat of a response for the second question. And I mean, I think everybody wants to help out any low-income community, but if the big issue in those communities is not air quality, which I doubt if it's North County, I would rather prefer focus on first making sure that San Isidro School District and Sweetwater School District have electric vehicles, and I'm missing one district here in the south, but I would prefer to prioritize the districts that are locally here in which one was it?
South Bay District, South Bay Elementary District?
Yes. So that one as well, making sure that they're first prioritizing these kind of funding and then moving on to other communities. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. We also would like to prioritize those school districts. They need to apply for the funding for us to be able to fund those projects. And we do have some school buses. San Isidro is working on some electric school buses from last year's round of funding. But the other school districts that you mentioned have not yet applied for funding. We'd be happy to prioritize those.
How long would they have until to apply for the funding?
They could apply right now. We still have a lot of money available.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Let's go to Lee.
Thank you. I have a clarification question. So
I wonder if this incentive program is a one-time program. So, for example, like the zero emission trucks or vehicles, they may need some maintenance after years. So that this program cover the maintenance after years, or do these companies need to reapply for the program to maintain the instruments?
That's a good question, Lee. We don't pay for maintenance as part of this program. It is strictly a program to obtain that new equipment. So it would be on the businesses that purchase that equipment to plan for and budget for maintenance in future years.
Thank you.
Great. Are there any other questions or comments?
I have another quick question, if I can.
Go for it.
What kind of outreach is being done for like local, for the smaller Otay Mesa, like trunk companies or warehouse companies? Just wondering.
We did do some outreach and participate in at least one event through the Otay Mesa Chamber of Commerce. And we work with our truck dealerships here in San Diego County to get the word out about the program. We also have an email notification list that people can sign up for to find out about the incentive programs. And I think we did some social media advertising as well on the district Facebook, and it's not Twitter anymore, but social media for the district. We'd be happy to do more if folks have organizations or names or people that we can reach out to. We would really appreciate that information.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. And just to uplift the SERP, actually, that's one of the strategies that folks in this group have shared, right? To do more intentional outreach to those particular, smaller trucking companies and also that's certainly something that I know Kathy's group is well aware of and is already kind of thinking about how to do that moving forward as well. And then Christopher's not here today, but thinking about, what are partnerships with like truck stops, getting that information out as well as the strategy. So thanks for uplifting that, Alejandro. Any other questions or comments? So Kathy, what are next steps for your group? How are you going to be using this feedback either in this round or future rounds as well?
Well, our next stop is the Portside Steering Committee. We'll do the very similar presentation with them next week. We'll take that feedback back and we'll take a look and see what projects we can fund, which companies are interested in participating in the program. Given that you all don't have hopefully big objections to any of those projects. And then the other thing that we heard, I just want to uplift that idea of looking back and seeing how we can do more and better outreach, particularly to small businesses and trucking businesses in the Otay Mesa area. We'll take that back and incorporate that into our outreach plan. And again, continue to prioritize that zero emission equipment, get the most emission reductions we can with the dollars we have. So that's our plan moving forward.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kathy. And I know there's a few people asking to see different slides with the map and all. What I could also do, I could email out this presentation to folks, and so that you all can navigate it. And if you have additional questions, can certainly reach out directly to Kathy or Heidi or myself to, happy to answer those questions as well. I'm not sure, Kathy, if you're able to put that presentation directly into the chat, but if not, I could certainly email it out to folks.
I'll create a PDF of the presentation and I'll send it to you, Monique, and you can distribute it to the group. Would that work for folks? All right.
We could definitely email that out, Jason.
Yeah,
for sure. Okay. Thanks, Idma. All right. Well, thanks, Heidi and Kathy, for putting that together. As another thing too, I think, definitely well noted. everyone's comments, and I'm just thinking about your comments right now, Alejandro, in terms of prioritization. That's something that certainly the incentives team wants to certainly integrate as we're kind of moving forward, with kind of the distribution of incentives as well, and thinking about how that could be done through that lens of prioritization as well. So thanks all for sharing your thoughts and questions regarding this. Okay, so it's 5:50. I know we've been here for close to an hour now. We're gonna transition a little bit. We're gonna transition and we're gonna be focusing on the community mission reduction program. Let me go ahead and pull up my screen again. So we'll be primarily using this screen to navigate. 1 second. Feel free if you need, right, to stretch, to get some water, to go to the bathroom, take care of your needs, whatever you might need in this moment. So let's see, 1 second. Someone's needing me to answer the phone, but I'm not going to do that right now. So let's see, where did the presentation go? Elsa, I see your hand up. Elsa, do you have a question or a comment?
Sí, buenas tardes. Nada más para preguntar, el correo electrónico que va a mandar Monique, ¿lo podemos pasar a la gente de la comunidad también? ¿Pasar esa información?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. I'll also make sure that we post it on our website that we have for this committee as well. So it's definitely public, something that you can also share with any member of the community. Absolutely.
Muy bien, muchas gracias.
Yeah, no, great question.
And I wasn't really reading too much the slides, but is there the link for the applications themselves within that PowerPoint?
Oh, that's a great question. Kathy, is there a link for the application? Do you know?
I will add one right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Awesome. Great questions. Okay. Can everybody see my screen okay? It should look like a lot of words. It's a SERP table of contents at the top. Okay. Elsa, do you have another question or comment, or was that one answered previously? I just see your hand still up. Right. So I just want to kind of orient us in terms of what we've covered so far. We've done a lot of work together, and I just want to first share my appreciation for all of you getting us this far in the process. What I've done here is I've highlighted in green things that this committee has already in some way reviewed and provided feedback. Or I'm sorry, highlighted in gray. So it's some things that you've already reviewed and provided feedback. So you've already reviewed the mission, objective, values, goals, and vision statement, provided feedback. So I'm in the process of integrating what you've shared to update those sections. And one of the biggest things, and it took us about 2 to 3 months to do this, but you all reviewed, actually it took us 6 months. First 3 months to create, 3 to 4 months to create the strategies, right? Together. And then it took us about 2 months to review kind of those strategies that were developed. And so that was one of the biggest lifts that this group did. And really, when you think of the community mission reduction program, that's really the heart of the program. Or what are those strategies that are going to be implemented in order to reduce emissions and improve air quality, improve public health, quality of life, and so forth. But there are other chapters in the community mission reduction program that we've also been working on, and that you've all been helping inform as well in the process as well. So today, what I've highlighted in green are the chapters that we'll collectively go over. And these chapters, again, I'm going to provide kind of a high-level presentation on what you will find in these chapters, how you informed the elements of these chapters. But I will also put, and it's quite all right, I'm going to put it in the chat box now because I encourage you to also look through it and navigate it as well. I'm also going to put in the chat box where you can find links to the draft chapters that I'll be going over today. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in the chat box now. Second. I encourage you to write comments and notes on that, on those documents. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a second so I could share a different screen with you all. Okay. So you should be able to see on the screen a Google folder, and it has the chapters that we're going to go over today in both Spanish and English. So feel free to open whichever one you'd like to open up. The first part of it has kind of the overall table of contents. And then you'll get into the actual chapters itself. Feel free to add comments directly to the document, and we can integrate folks' feedback. Now, I know that this is the first time that you all are seeing these chapters, and that's okay. Tonight is not going to be the only time that you have an opportunity to provide your feedback on these chapters. Tonight, really the intention and purpose is for me to just walk us through that, provide a high-level description of what you'll find in these chapters, so that when you go and take the time to read through these chapters, you'll have a little bit more grounding to help you navigate the chapters itself. And my hope is that the next time we connect, that we can take some time and I can hear from folks once folks have had an opportunity to hear this presentation today. And then if people have the ability and time to, once they've reviewed the chapters, can also share what they've reviewed and any kind of feedback they'd like to share today. So again, today's not going to be the only time folks can provide feedback on these chapters. I want to be completely mindful, understanding I'm just sharing the actual documents for these chapters today. But today, really the intention is to just set the foundation, and then also answer any questions as well that folks might have, or any feedback as well that folks might want to even share today. So it's going to be a bit of a presentation. I'm going to take some time to pause throughout to just make sure that if folks have any questions or comments, that folks are able to share that during the conversation today. So what you see on the screen here is kind of a high-level table of contents. What's in gray are things that you've already have reviewed and provided feedback on. And then what is in green is what I'm going to provide a high-level presentation on. And it's actually those chapters that I just put in the chat box as well. Okay. Any questions on that before I get started? Well, chapter 3 and chapter 6 that you see is not highlighted here. These are chapters you haven't seen or reviewed yet, but you will have a chance during our October meeting. Though that's going to be the focus of that October meeting, is chapter 3 and chapter 6 that we'll be going over together. Okay. I do have a couple of asterisks or stars here next to the strategies chapter. The reason for that is because I think we've done a whole bunch of revisions on the strategy section based upon your feedback, but also we've had Air Pollution Control District staff and also California Air Resources Board staff as well review the strategies and provide feedback as well. So we've made a number of revisions to the strategy section that is going to be really important that we actually set aside some time to review those strategies one more time. And to make sure that the feedback you all shared, the feedback we heard from APCD staff and CARB staff shared, is integrated into that in the way that you like to see. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But that's why those stars are there. Because just because you've already provided feedback on that doesn't mean it's done. I think we should revisit it because of the number of edits that have been made to that particular chapter 4. Okay. So the first chapter in this community emission reduction program, right? In this document that we've all have been in the process of co-developing for the past year, essentially. In the background section, just really provides what's the backstory to this group getting together and starting this process. So it talks a little bit about in 2018 was when the communities of San Ysidro and Otay Mesa, along with the Air Pollution Control District, submitted an application to the California Air Resources Board to be considered for the AB 617 program, but it really wasn't until February of 2022 that Otay Mesa and San Ysidro communities their nomination was approved by CARB to be part of the official AB 617 program. So it talks a bit about that history as well. The background section as well talks a little bit about the two components of the AB 617 program. The first component being the Community Air Monitoring Plan, or which we've also called CAMP, Community Air Monitoring Plan, which is what you all have been, when you first started this process, we're working really closely with Kevin and David. And I think I see Rebecca here as well on our team. I think Jose as well as here today with our monitoring team to identify where the air pollution monitor should be, right? And you've all identified and mapped out where those monitors should be. And then also start to identify what are those key priority areas, but also issues as well, air quality concerns as well, as part of the Community Air Monitoring Plan. Part of the Community Emission Reduction Program, which is the document that this is a chapter in, is really, and it talks a little bit about what the intention of the SERP is really to identify, have you all collectively identify strategies that can reduce pollution levels in the community as well. So it gives a little bit of background to the reader as to the history of how this committee came to be, but also provides a little bit of background about the AB 617 program, about what are the components in the CAP, what are the components in the SERP, and what folks can expect moving forward as part of this SERP document. It also provides a little bit of background about the public outreach and engagement process as part of the development of the CAMP and SERP. And so it talks a bit about the formation of the International Border Community Steering Committee as well. So that's really kind of what chapter 1 is doing, is just kind of laying down the history of how this group came to be and what the CAMP and the SERP is all about. Before I go on to the second chapter, I just want to pause and see if folks have any questions or comments that folks like to share now. But again, I don't want you to feel pressure that you have to share tonight and it's going to be the only time, because it's not. I want some time, at least a month of time, or 2 to 3 weeks of time for you all to have the opportunity to review the documents and to be able to provide feedback. But as of right now, do folks have any questions or comments on chapter 1? Cool. All right, so we're going to go to chapter 2. So one of the other elements that you'll find in the community mission reduction program is essentially a description of the community. So a community profile of sorts. In the community profile, it provides information on, you know, what are the experiences of folks in the community, but also uplifts those air quality priority issues that you've all have started to identify as well. One of the things that I really wanted to be mindful of, and I need your support in doing that. And so as you're reading kind of the beginning part of chapter 2, I really want to be mindful of as well is uplifting the amazing communities that San Ysidro and Otay Mesa are, despite these air quality concerns and issues. And so I really want to do a good job in the narrative of uplifting the vibrant and culturally rich binational communities that are vibrant with art, with music, with food, with people flowing back and forth, right? So any suggestions of how we could paint a holistic picture of what it is like, right, to live in and work and be in San Ysidro and Otay Mesa, beyond kind of more like the air quality concerns, but also humanize, right, a place in which we're bombarded so many times, right, with these statistics, which are real and impactful. But I want to be really mindful too of uplifting the amazing things of this by national community as well. So that's something I'd love folks' support on as we're kind of drafting the community profile, that I really want to uplift as well. But within the community profile as well, there's a number of stats that you'll see to start to paint the picture in terms of the air quality issues and the impacts on the community themselves. So information like you'll find where, you know, San Ysidro being, having the highest traffic volume than any other place in the state, right? So having that information as well. Thanks, Jason. I see your note in the chat box. Definitely write comments into the draft document for sure. There's other things as well in terms of demographics that we want to include in here, in terms of you know, information about the community, in terms of the amount of resources families have, access to healthcare as well, that could impact, you know, already in a community that's overburdened from these pollution sources. There's other things as well, such as having access to healthcare, or you know, even having just the time to even go to the doctor, right? That further compound these health issues as well. So we have kind of that information in the community profile section. And then we start to go into detail. And you all are super familiar with this now. So we've been seeing these images almost every session. But these are the priorities that you all have identified. One around, and I'll just go through each of these one by one. But one has been around, you know, community care, right? So this kind of last column right here, making sure that those that are most vulnerable to the impacts of air pollution are cared for. So thinking about folks who are elderly, thinking about children whose lungs are still developing, thinking about special locations, right? Not only health centers where people might have a chronic illness, but also thinking about schools, right? Thinking about parks, senior centers. So, you know, making sure that those have special care and treatment. And so those that went through the strategy saw that there was a number of strategies to ensure intentional community care. So in that section, we have some data and information in terms of health indicators, in terms of asthma rates. There where we were able to find information that the asthma rates in the area are higher than 60 to 78%. Than other communities or census tracts throughout California. So much more higher rate, right? So we try to find some health data and information to further contextualize the importance of this issue. We also had passenger vehicles, right, being something that folks really uplifted in terms of being a priority. We wanted to include in that a little bit of history of the freeways. The freeways weren't there 1,000 years ago, right? They weren't there even 100 years ago. So how did they come to be? How did that kind of planning impact the community and continues to impact the community as well? But also understanding the port of entry as well. Was able to also further contextualize the impact, did some research on the amount of crossings that are happening at the San Isidro port of entry. So just for the month of June, there were about 25,367 bus passengers. There were about 615,232 pedestrians. And how many vehicles? Can I hear a guess from folks? How many vehicles passed through the port of entry in the month of June this year? Can I hear from folks? How many vehicles do you think? You can put it in the chat box or just say it out loud. What do folks think? Okay, we have 100,000 in the chat, so 100,000 vehicles in 1 month. 120? Oh, 1 million, okay, getting closer. Getting closer. So just for the month of June this year, there were 1,352,353 personal vehicles that crossed the border. And that's just for 1 month, the month of June, which is quite a number. And then in terms of the amount of people who were in those vehicles, it was about 2,177,654 people were inside those passenger vehicles. So essentially 1.3 million or close to 1.4 million in 1 month of cars passing through the port of entry. So that contextualizes, right, the amount of impact, right? So one of the things, again, that we are trying to do in this community profile section is to further bring in some some data and information in terms of the impact. Oh, that's a good question, Jenny. That's just for San Isidro, not Otay. That is just the San Isidro port of entry. That's a good question. Yeah. So to contextualize it using data, one of the things that is missing from this community profile are stories, community testimonials and stories about, I can give you data and I can give you stats all day long, but those stories are the things that also kind of ground and root, right, these experiences for many folks, and also help support in the advocacy as well. And Jason just put another 500,000 vehicles at Otay as well, passenger cars, yeah. So I think this is one thing at APCD we can use your support in as well. If you want to share a story about the impact of any one of these things, the impact of the amount of passenger vehicles passing by Willow Elementary, right? If you want to share a story about the impact of the odors from the Tijuana River Valley, right? I would love to sit with you one-on-one and with your consent, of course, is to document that story and make sure we integrate that into the community profiles as well, to again really not just talk about numbers, but to really uplift the real people, right, that are being impacted from this, but also to uplift that people are not only being impacted, but they're also folks like you all here are working together to help move these initiatives forward as well. So that's one thing that you're going to see missing from the community profile section. And I want to invite whoever would like to hear, or if maybe you have friends and family that you think would be good to share a testimonial on any one of these issues. Please let me know, and I'd love to sit down with you all one-on-one, hear your stories, and then through a consent process, you all get to like, see how that story's written, and then share like, okay, share like what you want in it, what you don't. Again, that's something that we certainly would welcome, and that's kind of missing from the community profile section, to be honest. We also, folks talked a lot about heavy duty trucks, right? And so with that, specifically, let's see. With that specifically, folks were talking about, of course, the trucks coming, crossing through Otay Mesa, right? Talked a lot about the warehouses really close, or in Otay Mesa, kind of like trucks kind of doing kind of that circle, right? The idling that happens. Also trucks going on the 905, and then with a lot of new housing and proposed housing there, concerns around current and future impacts, right? From those vehicles as well. In this part too, we also wanted to uplift. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Jason. The border stats there. Was able to find some information. So let's see. I'm gonna ask another quiz question here. Okay, in the month of May this past year, how many trucks crossed through Otay Mesa, heavy duty trucks? In the month of May, for just 1 month, how many trucks crossed in Otay Mesa? Go ahead and put your answer in the chat. In just 1 month. The month of May, what do people think? 35,000, 50,000, 120. So in just 1 month, there were 91,829 trucks that crossed the Otay Mesa crossing. Again, these are trucks that aren't just crossing, but they're also idling, right? Waiting in line, right? Waiting to get across as well. In 2021, there were more than 1 million cargo trucks importing more than $37 billion in goods that crossed into Otay Mesa. This is considered California's busiest commercial truck crossing, right? California's busiest commercial truck crossing. But again, it's not just about the crossing, it's about, and then Jason put here second in the nation. Thanks for all this data. Yeah, I'm not sure in terms of like its increase in the past 5 years. I'd imagine so, given the amount of warehouses that have increased, but that's anecdotal. I haven't seen the data on that. Maybe Jason, can you speak to that?
No, I don't. I would know the passenger stats, but comparison on trucking. My assumption, again, I don't know this to be scientific, but my assumption is yes, it has increased. Most border crossing stats have now surpassed just prior to the pandemic levels, which were higher than they were 5 years ago.
Thanks for sharing that context. Irma, yeah.
Sí, yo nomás quería hacer un comentario que hace un par de meses andaba en México y llegué al aeropuerto de Tijuana y era un caos, que estaban haciendo hasta 9 horas los trailers para cruzar. Todos estaban por toda la carretera del aeropuerto para llegar a la garita, y ahora todavía, ayer miré las noticias que todavía están parados para cruzar. Por eso digo, no creo que crucen tantos diario, porque están cruzando de 5 o 6 trailers por día, porque están haciendo muchas horas. Yo le pregunté a uno de los que manejan, le dije, ¿por qué están haciendo tanto tráfico y paran los trailers así en medio de la calle. Es un caos ahí en Tijuana, pues pegadito a la línea, porque no nos están dando el pase libre. Dice, todavía no, y pues aquí tenemos que estar.
Yeah.
Le dije, ¿por qué no apagan los trailers? Dice, porque es carga que está congelada y no lo podemos apagar. Así fue el comentario que me dijo el señor. Le dije, pero ustedes están gastando más diésel y aparte nos están contaminando más.
Yeah.
Pero dijo, pues, ¿qué quiere que haga, señora? Se nos va a echar a perder la mercancía. Y pues dije, bueno, pues suerte, a ver cuántas horas hace. Dice, pues de aquí a 10 horas. Estaban esperando 10 horas para cruzar. Bueno, ese era mi comentario.
Wow.
Gracias.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, Irma. I mean, that really no problem. Thanks for sharing that, Irma. That really contextualizes too that it's not just the amount, it's the time that they're just there with the trucks on, right? That, you know, with the inefficiencies of going through, with the technologies not being transitioned over yet, right? That impact just kind of explodes, so to speak, right? To a certain extent. I'm gonna go to Jenny next. Jenny. Jenny, I think you're on mute. Jenny, did you want to share something? Okay. No worries. Jenny, are you still there? Okay, no worries. Okay, no worries, Jenny. So other things as well, right, that folks shared is kind of the cross-border impacts as well. And I was able to find some more information in terms of the different the industries that are across the border, and the amount of people that work at those factories and all is equivalent to the size or the population of Chula Vista. So about 270,000 people are employed in the factories across the border as well, which, you know, big industry and economy for the region as well. So just thinking about kind of the amount of people, right? The amount of operations that are happening that are causing those emissions as well. So again, this chapter really tries to both paint the picture in terms of what those impacts are, provide some data around kind of the impact as well. But one thing that's kind of missing, like I shared, is kind of more of those personal stories to even further kind of help contextualize that. Certainly welcome folks who may be interested in sharing a story or two, or know folks who might be interested in sharing a story, to integrate that into the chapter. Jason, I see your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to break your train of thought, but you're talking about changing dynamics at the border and the so one thing that we were taught, or that we found during the pandemic, it started with the pandemic and it increased because of the pricing of housing in San Diego. The vast majority of border crossers today are now actually U.S. residents or U.S. citizens. And why that's important to this discussion is because before, while 60 to 70% were casual shoppers, they may have just gone across the border and gone to the Chula Vista Mall, or hopefully San Isidro to shop, or just crossing. Right now, because it's workers, now they're U.S. folks going from their house in Tijuana now to employment centers, which may be way further down the road. Certainly, if we're talking about, Claremont, not Claremont, but the the employment centers up north and so forth.
Yeah.
What we saw was during the pandemic, there was a restriction on tourist visas. So the only people that could cross the border were U.S. citizens or legal residents. There were 100,000 per day.
Wow.
Still crossing during the pandemic. and that number has grown because of the housing prices in San Diego. So
Yeah.
it not only are the number of crossings back up, but the actual mileage per car that's crossing there is actually increased because now you're going to employment centers and not just shopping centers.
You know what, Jason, I really appreciate you uplifting that. And that's something I didn't have in the narrative as it pertains to passenger vehicles, but like bringing in the whole issue of housing, right? And affordability, and how that's also driving up, you know, those passenger vehicle crossings, but also that's also impacting, right? Even traffic the further north you go away from the border, as well. And so, I'm going to make a note of that to make sure to include that in terms of the narrative, to like paint a more full picture of what's kind of driving those crossings as well. So thank you for that. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and transition a bit, and we're gonna get into chapter 5 a little bit as well. But I wanted to share this kind of visual with you all here. Is that, you know, the past, I don't know, 2-3 months, or actually 6 months, we're kind of creating the strategies and then reviewing them. And in the strategy, you saw that there was a number of actions that were part of it. What we haven't reviewed yet in the strategies are like the metrics and timeline, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But today we're going to focus on 2 major actions that are part of chapter 5. So as part of the actions, there's certainly advocacy actions. Like, for example, one of the strategies that is in the SERP is supporting a binational kind of trolley, right? A trolley that goes into Tijuana and brings people to the US and vice versa. So having more efficient kind of transit system. Well, that's listed as an advocacy type of action, because APCD and also CARB, they don't necessarily have jurisdiction over to make that happen, right? Whereas, you know, we would need we need like MTS, SANDAG, the state of Baja, right? They would be the ones that would have the jurisdiction over that. So as an action to support that particular strategy, an action would be that this group, along with APCD support and other folks, other public agencies that are part of this group, is to advocate to the appropriate entities to support that, to make it happen, right? There's also research actions that are part of strategies. There's also outreach and education actions, monitoring actions, incentives. We talked a little bit about those today in terms of those strategies moving forward, or actions moving forward. But chapter 5 of the Community Emission Reduction Program specifically focuses on enforcement and compliance activities that both the Air District and also the California Air Resources Board can do to help advance some of the elements in the SERP. So we're going to focus on the enforcement and compliance actions that actually have their own dedicated chapter in the SERP. So that's chapter 5. So we'll talk about, in terms of, hey, there's a lot of strategies that are listed in the SERP, in the draft SERP that you all identified, that aren't necessarily APCD's jurisdiction, aren't necessarily CARB's jurisdiction. So there's advocacy and research and outreach and education actions to take care of that. But there are a handful of strategies in the SERP that it is APCD's jurisdiction to work on. It is APCD or CARB's jurisdiction to work on and advance. And so that's what chapter 5 is all about, is like, hey, what is an APCD's ability, what is in CARB's ability, and what is our responsibility, more importantly, to move forward and take action on, in terms of as it relates to the roles and duties of our agencies, but also being mindful of capacity and resources that we will need, right, to do and take those steps to implement and do those actions as well. So I'm going to focus first on what are APCD's kind of actions, or part of their enforcement program, as it's called in the chapter. So there's four main things that APCD can do in terms of enforcement or compliance that they will be doing as part of SERP implementation. The first is field inspections of stationary sources and mobile sources. First and foremost, the local air district, the San Diego Air Pollution Control District, which is the local air district, really is the entity that's keeping a close eye on and regulating stationary sources. So thinking about things like gas stations, different facilities, let's say mechanic shops, things, anything that's kind of like in one spot or remains in one spot, those are the types of things that APCD is regulating. So if there's anything like, let's say a generator, right? Those types of, sources that do emit different pollutants, right? They have to get a permit by the air district and comply with the current rules and regulations at APCD in order to continue operate, right? And APCD actually checks those stationary sources at least once a year. So they go and check and making sure that the equipment is operating based upon the standards and regulations at APCD, right? But one of the unique things at APCD, or actually, let me back up for a minute to just contextualize this a bit. So in 2022, there were about 8,600 permitted sources throughout the entire region that APCD is managing and checking, that our compliance team is out there checking, right? And that's region-wide. Let's guess, how many stationary sources do we think are in San Ysidro and Otay Mesa? They're in the international border communities. So out of those 8,600, want to put in the chat, how many of those sources are, so Alejandro put 1,000. Any other guesses? Those permitted sources that APCD is doing kind of those annual checks on. Any other guesses? So in San Ysidro, Otay Mesa, in well, let me see, when is this data from? In 2022, there were, and Jenny says 2,000, there were actually 250 permitted sites or permitted sources in San Ysidro, Otay Mesa. So it's actually a kind of relatively smallish number of stationary sources. But as you all know, there's a number of, mobile sources that are kind of the bulk of the impact as well. But there's 250 that are those stationary sources that have a permit. And about 70% of those permitted sources in operation in San Ysidro, Otay Mesa includes engines, gas stations, boilers, and various types of, painting or coating operations, abrasive blasting as well. So that constitutes about 70% of those 250 permitted sources in San Ysidro itself. Also, there is one Title V, I believe one Title V source. And so these are sources that require to be inspected twice or even 4 times a year by APCD. And this is the Otay Mesa Energy Center, the Larkspur Energy and Cal Peak Power. So that there's one Title V that has additional kind of rules, regulations, and also additional inspections than the other kind of permitted sources as well. But one of the interesting things about this air district, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, someone on the APCD team, but I think the local air district here is the only air district in California, and Liliana, you might want to correct me on this too, but that has an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding with the California Air Resources Board to also do inspections on mobile sources. So this is the picture that you're seeing here. where we have APCD staff doing spot checks. Yeah, Liliana, you want to add to that? Am I wrong?
Oh, no, not, I wanted to give a thumbs up.
Yeah.
Yep, you're correct.
Okay, awesome. So that's unique, right? For a local air district to also be supporting with doing mobile source inspections. So mobile sources are like these heavy duty trucks, could include off-road equipment as well. So APCD is the only air district in the state that actually has that agreement with CARB. But I do want to say that the California Air Resources Board, CARB also does mobile source inspections in San Ysidro and Otay Mesa. So to put this into perspective, I have some information here. Just to put into perspective. Remember we said there was like 91,000 plus heavy duty trucks coming across the border in just 1 month. So we know that the volume is really large, much more beyond kind of capacity, but the spot checks that APCD has been able to do, let's say, for example, on average, APCD compliance staff does about 300 truck inspections, okay? So, and it's pretty labor intensive. You can see folks kind of getting into the vehicle, seeing, you know, where they're at with, you know, and testing, doing some analysis as well that you can see on the screen. But about 300 truck inspections are conducted annually. And then, and I was going to get to this a little bit later when I get there, but I'm sure people are going to ask, well, then how many does CARB do, right? In terms of, let's say for 2022, around the same time frame, CARB did about 113 truck and bus inspections at the international border and the international border communities. So again, it's small in comparisons to the amount of volume that's coming in, but these are kind of like spot checks as well. And for the most part, looking at kind of compliance rates, for the most part, they're finding that most are in compliance with existing regulations with those kind of spot checks as well. One of the things that folks shared as part of the strategies is folks really having an interest in increasing the amount of those mobile source inspections. Again, that's something that is going to require additional resources from the district and also at CARB to increase the number of that. And so one of the things we are being mindful of in terms of drafting the SERP strategies is incorporating into that an action that actually has a PCD look for creative ways in which to increase capacity, whether that be using new technologies to do some of those checks that are more automated, or also looking at are there other funding streams that are available either at the state or federal level, right, that can support more inspectors. Actually, is we need more folks, right, to be out in the field. So that's one supporting action that we're incorporating into this, basically because folks are asking for more inspections to take place, understandably so, right, given the amount of volume and all, but also incorporating the actions is like, what is APCD going to do to start to help, like, try to identify whether technology opportunities or additional funding opportunities to support greater capacity to do more compliance checks and so forth. So that's something that our team is being really mindful of as well, because certainly we'd love to do more of those checks, but we also need to make sure we're taking actions to increase capacity in order to be able to do that as well, which may take some time to do that, but also looking at potential technologies to do some of it more in an automated way. The other thing that's part of APCD's enforcement program, which you all are familiar with, and it's something we talked about at the beginning of this meeting, is in terms of air quality complaints investigations. Annually, APCD on average receives about 700 air quality complaints. Let me see, I think last year in 2022, there were 9 complaints, specifically in Sept that came from San Isidro and Otay Mesa. 9 complaints for the full year of 2022. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that there was nothing to complain about. That may more be an indicator to us that more outreach and engagement and spreading the word about what APCD does, how APC, who you can call if you detect smoke, if there's an odor, if there's dust coming from a construction site, who to call. It could be an indicator that there's more education and connection that needs to happen, right, with the community to get the word out. So there was 9 complaints from San Isidro Otay Mesa in 2022. Well, I shared with you at the beginning of this conversation that there were 20 just 2 weeks ago, right? So that's also showing me, one, maybe the word is getting out more, right? That folks are using that information and that hotline and all of that. So, and then on average, countywide in 2022, on average, those the inspectors are sent out to investigate, usually within 7.5 hours of the complaint being issued. In San Isidro, the average kind of investigation time was within like 6.7 hours of the complaint being issued. So our team works incredibly hard to have that as quick as possible turnaround time, because we know that sometimes these issues or these whatever's happening might be happening within a certain amount of time, or also if it's going to be something that's a risk to the community's health, we want to make sure we send our inspectors out there as soon as possible. On average, and always the team is working to close the gap in that time, but it's great to see the average there as well. And then in terms of enforcement documents, in violation settlements. So let's say APCD goes out and investigates a complaint, and they see that one of the stationary sources that APCD regulates is not in compliance. They can submit some kind of citation and require, right, that piece of equipment or whatever the situation may be, right, that it's fixed in order to get back into compliance, right? So there's an enforcement documentation process, but also if it's a really big issue, and I'll give you an example. The city of San Diego had a building that had asbestos in it, right? And they were in violation, right, in terms of APCD's rules and regulations to make sure that their workers and the community were safe from that. There was a settlement agreement, and so money was set aside and then Kathy, you can probably share with the folks what that, I think is like 4-point-something million money was set aside that's going to go towards planting trees in communities like Portside, in communities like the International Border Communities, right, in San Isidro, Otay Mesa, in communities like Southeastern and other communities. Kathy, do you recall the amount of that settlement?
I don't off the top of my head, but
okay,
let me see if I could find it while we're still online.
Yeah, I think it's 4-point-something million. But there are times in which the violation is so big that there needs to be some kind of community benefit, right? To make sure that there's funds being used to help improve quality of life and air quality in the community. Some remedy, right, in some way. And then there's compliance assistance. APCD doesn't just want to go out there and cite, businesses or folks operating certain equipment, right? They also want to provide some education as well, and help people get into compliance and not just offer citations, but say like, okay, how can we help you? What are the questions you have, right? To get your equipment in compliance, to get your operation in compliance. So there's an assistance program as well to support folks in that process as well. Kathy, I feel like it's a big drum roll. You're like, it? You're gonna put, there we go. It's 4.9 million. That was part of the settlement to plant trees. So actually in the new year, I'm gonna have someone from the city hopefully come and share more with this group about that settlement as well, and hear your thoughts in terms of where those trees, can and should be planted. Before I move on to CARB's enforcement program, I want to pause there and see if folks have any questions or comments regarding APCD's kind of enforcement program. Are there any comments or questions on that? I know that it's already been a lot tonight, so we only have one really big slide before we can transition out. All right, we're gonna power through then. Oh, Irma, yeah, what's your question or comment?
Sí, yo tengo una pregunta. Como aquí vivo en las trailas, están pintando la alberca, la desahogaron toda y la están pintando, pero el olor de pintura que están usando está súper, súper. ¿Se imagina? En el día olemos a pura pintura y en la noche a puro drenaje. ¿Cómo están nuestros pulmones? Yo ando bien mala de mi tos. Estoy aviente flemas, pero yo pienso de que tanta pintura y todos los olores de los drenajes. ¿Cómo trabaja eso porque yo sé que no todo el tiempo tienen para reparar a piscinas, pero cómo se trabajaría con ellos para explicarles que pusieran algo, porque nomás pusieron una lona así y pues no pusieron nada y todo la contaminación de la pintura sale por todos lados. Ya nomás les dije a los vecinos, pues cierren sus ventanas y pongan su aire acondicionado porque pues estar oliendo de día la pintura y de noche el drenaje, pues sí, todas andamos malas de los bronquios, yo creo, porque yo estoy aventando muchas flemas. ¿Cómo se trabajaría con ellos?
Yeah, Irma, thank you for sharing that. And I'm so sorry that you and your neighbors are experiencing that right now. I really appreciate you uplifting that. I think in cases like that, I would say call APCD right away to uplift that. And actually this kind of falls into what I'm going to talk about next, because the California Air Resources Board regulates consumer products. So that might include some paints. And I'm not sure if APCD also regulates kind of paints, but there might want to be a check in terms of like, what are the materials that they're, or the paints that are being used? Is it in compliance with what should be used here? And also, I think that's something we certainly would want to.
Perdón.
Irma, I think yeah. I'm not able to see anything, Irma. I don't know if you're trying to show us something. Okay, now I can see you. Now I can see you. Yeah, we can't hear you, Irma. I think you may be a little bit too far, maybe from Wi-Fi signal or something. Oh, I think she may have dropped off. Yeah, I think she may have dropped off because of the the distance maybe she walked. But, you know, in cases like that, I'd say certainly, and you don't have to know like who regulates what. That's what we're here to do. We're here to help answer those questions. Yeah. Yeah, so I think you're on the English channel translating. So no worries, no worries. I just want to let you know. But again, you don't have to know who's regulating what. That's why you should call us, and we'll help figure out who's the proper regulator and get the right person out there. But that's a really that example is a good example of everyday experiences that
Gracias.
should be checked on. Yeah, thank you, Irma.
Sí, gracias.
We're at 6:50, so I'm going to go through this part a little bit quickly, but there's going to be a lot of repetitive things as well. So just, you know, and remember the air district, the local air district, again, really focuses on stationary sources. This district's a little bit more special and unique than maybe other districts because there is some mobile source inspections that are happening. But for the most part, the mobile source inspections are really the responsibility of the California Air Resources Board. So they're inspecting, right, heavy duty trucks. They're inspecting also public agency owned utility fleets, so like buses, you know, cranes, those types of things. They're also you know, inspecting or regulating off-road vehicles like construction equipment or cranes or forklifts, those types of things. Trash trucks in the neighborhood. Also making sure that folks' registration is updated, that smog checks or smog checks are being passed, right? They also, and you see this in Portside, right? The harbor crafts and those big cargo ships, right? This is what Irma was talking about earlier about those refrigeration units for those trucks as well. And then also consumer products. So thinking about hairspray or cleaners, those types of things you might find in your home. Is another thing that APCD is regulating as well. APCD also has sends inspectors to follow up on complaints as well. And what I could do too is I'm gonna need to send an email to you all with some information as follow-up of today, but I'll check in with Liliana to also get kind of also CARB's complaints information so that you also could connect with both us and CARB or CARB if there's certain complaints as well that you want to file. So I'll make sure to get that sent in the email and work with Liliana as well. But they also receive complaints and send inspectors out to those complaints as well. Typically CARB, because they're all over the state, right? Typically, I believe what they put in their chapter here, it takes about 24 hours on average for CARB to send an investigator and go check out the situation. Sometimes it's much quicker than that, but on average, it's about 24 hours, if I'm not mistaken, if I recall what I read earlier this week on that. So, and just like APCD, CARB also has a supplemental environmental projects, meaning that there might be some violations that are so big that it requires a company, right, to pay money for a project that benefits the community as well. So thinking about the community emission reduction program, you've all kind of identified some community projects that you'd like to see as well. So those are things that could be eligible, right, for some of these, some of the funding from these, from the violations as well. All right, any questions on that? All right. We just covered 3 chapters, right? It was a lot to cover. And you know, I want to be really mindful, right? Like it was a lot of my voice in this space tonight. But I wanted to provide kind of like a foundation for you all. You all have the draft of those 3 chapters. I put it in the chat box. I'll also do a follow-up email tomorrow, include that in the email tomorrow so you can look at that. there's more work to be done collectively on these chapters. I want to hear from you. Feel free to add comments to it. If easier, you can call me as well and provide your feedback verbally. And I'll do my best to integrate that into the chapters itself. So here we are in September, right? We just reviewed 3 chapters. Next month, looking ahead, we're gonna, or actually I have it here, October, we're gonna continue to look at more chapters. We're gonna look at the tonight we looked at like the enforcement, the background, community profiles chapter. Next month we'll be looking at the emissions inventory and the monitoring chapter a bit more closely. And then looking ahead is in November, we hope to have some kind of final draft for you to review, like the entire thing put together, right? And then in December, with the feedback that we hear from you all, that we hear from staff at APCD, from CARB staff as well, we hope to finalize that document. And then hopefully in January, come back before this committee, have you all vote on that, and then also have them, the Air Pollution Control Board districts, vote on approving the CERP. And then hopefully by February, right, we get to go to the California Air Resources Board to review and also approve the CERP as well. So we're in this marathon, but we're keeping good pace and good timing as well. So next month, we would have already reviewed all the things in gray. And then the things in blue is what we'll be talking about in more detail next month. But I put here in green something we'll need to go over again, which is the strategies. I know we spent about 2 months going over the strategies and providing feedback, but we integrated that feedback not only from you, but also from APCD staff, CARB staff as well. And so not that the strategies look dramatically different. In substance, they're the same, but there's some nuances in terms of some of the changes that were made that we want to make sure that you all see and have an opportunity to provide feedback on. But also we haven't had a chance to review some of the metrics for each one of these strategies, meaning how are we going to measure or determine if something is a success, if something has been completed. Those are the metrics. We also have a timeline, like a tentative timeline. What are the timelines for each one of these strategies? We have some suggestions, but we don't want to be the final say on that. We want to hear your thoughts in terms of the timeline for some of these things as well. So we will need to kind of carve out some time to do that again. Given that you've seen kind of like this timeline of where we're headed, it actually may mean that we might need some more time to meet again, beyond just our monthly meetings. And but I'm gonna put a poll up right now, and I'd love to hear from you all in terms of like, do you think, and you should see the poll coming up in both English and Spanish. Like, are you interested and able to meet additional dates? Is really the question here. And you can click on, you know, I'm not able or interested in meeting more than our monthly meetings. That's okay. I want you to be, you know, truthful and real with us. You might put, you know, I'm available to meet via Zoom. And I have a couple of dates here, October 4th. Or you might say, I'm available to meet via Zoom on November 1st, or I'm available to meet both days as well. Or you might say, I'd like to meet, but those dates don't work for me as well. So I want you to take a moment to fill out this poll. And I just want to kind of get a sense of where people are in terms of maybe adding a couple more meetings so that we can make sure we have time to not only go over the chapters we talked about or that I basically shared background on today, but to also revisit the strategies again. And so I just want to be mindful of where people are on that. I want to wait a few more seconds before I end the poll, just to hear from folks. Thank you all who have taken it already. If you're having trouble seeing the poll or taking the poll, also feel free to write your response or your thoughts in the chat box as well. All right. I think there's a few more. Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and press end the poll. I see folks kind of changing their answers here. It's all good. Let me end the poll. This is just to give us a snapshot, an idea of how we should move forward. Can you all see the results of the poll?
Yes.
Okay, great. So it looks like the majority of folks would like to meet via Zoom both October 4th and November 1st. There's some folks, at least one person who could do the November date and one person who could do the October date. Everyone's pretty much in agreement. We need more time to discuss and meet. I know that there's a couple people that the dates and times don't work for folks. I'd encourage those folks maybe to reach out to me one-on-one. I'm happy to do one-on-one meetings with folks too. If you want to share your feedback that way, I am certainly open to that. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and I'll send out invitations and Zoom calendar invites and all of that for November 1st and October 4th. And we'll go ahead and put time on our calendar set aside so that we can meet a little bit more frequent in the month of October and November to make sure that there's plenty of time and opportunities for community members, for CSC members to provide input. If you're a community member that receives a stipend, you will get stipends for these days as well, these additional days as well. So I just wanted to name that as well. So thank you all for taking the survey, and we'll go ahead and add those 2 additional meetings to make sure that we have enough time, right, to engage in these important conversations. I'm going to share my screen really quick. I know we're a little bit over time, but I want to give you a heads up on what to expect next time or next CSC official meeting. I know we're going to be meeting on October 4th. We'll focus on strategies October 4th, and we can also focus on these chapters that we talked a bit about on October 4th. But at the next official monthly CSC meeting, which is on the 18th, we're actually going to have Representative David Alvarez come and speak. And we're also hoping to have Diane Tekforian, who is a CARB board member, come and speak specifically around the advanced clean fleets rule around transitioning to diesel heavy duty trucks to electric trucks. You've all been a part of these conversations in terms of there's been a couple of actions this past year that David Alvarez has taken that would impact the implementation of the Advanced Clean Fleets rule. So I think it was Stanford who made this request a few months ago to see if he could come and actually share the reasoning behind that and share more with this group about that. And hopefully Diane Tekforian could come as well to kind of share her perspective as a board member in terms of the importance of the Advanced Clean Fleets rule. And then on the 18th, we'll go over chapter 3. We'll have a special presentation by CARB, and then we'll also have our monitoring team hopefully come and do a special presentation on that particular chapter as well. So that's kind of what's on the horizon. Yeah, and thank you, Maritza. I know folks are needing to leave. Before we head off, I just want to open it up to folks and see if there's any public comments, any special announcements that folks like to make before we head out for the night. All right, Domingo, are there any special comments or?
Nothing from my, just thank everybody for hanging in there, and thank you for being with us. I know it's a long meeting, so good night, everybody, and thanks for being with us again.
Thank you, everyone, and we'll certainly be in touch. All right, take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Buenas noches.
Gracias, gracias,
Gracias a
panelistas,
todos.
por toda
Gracias.
la
Buenas
información.
noches.
Nos vemos.